Thank you to everybody for coming today. I really appreciate everybody straggling in one way and another. Hopefully you all drove Alfa Romeos to arrive today for the Alfa Romeo talk. If you didn't, that's acceptable. Just lie to me. That's fine. Everybody online, I know you probably have an Alfa Romeo at home in the garage. So, hey, if you need to get up in the middle of this talk, go out and take a peek, come back, sit down. We're all good. Just surround ourselves with Alfas. So I wanted to introduce myself in case anybody who knows me, they know I'm an Alfa freak. My name is Fred Russell. Hey, even Fred Russell without a mask. How's that? I am the president of the Northwest Alfa Romeo Club. I'm also the guest curator here at the LeMay Museum. And I'm focused on the Alfa Romeo exhibit. The guest curator means they don't have to pay me. It means they don't get special parking. It just means I get to come around and talk like I'm an expert. It's great. You guys, anybody gets a chance to be a curator, do it. But the star of our show today is, well, I was going to say that's the great audience that's here, but it's actually, to be honest, it's this guy sitting next to me. This is David Smith.
Hello.
David Smith is not only a nice guy, not only a great husband, not only a good businessman, he also has a bad habit with hydroplanes and cars, in particular Alfa Romeos. So today, I'd like to welcome David Smith for joining us. So we're going to go through a little talk. We're going to go through a talk today on the Alfa Romeo S11. Now, a few of you may know what an Alfa S11 is, but an S11 is an odd designation. Not in most of the books. You see Alfa 8Cs, 6Cs, all sorts of things. They always have a nomenclature that has to do with an engine. So do you want to share with us a little something about what the heck is an S11?
Well, this starts out in end of 1936 in Italy and in Milan. And Alfa Romeo decided at that time that they needed to compete with the larger and different basically car manufacturers throughout the world. And they were building 8Cs and 6Cs, very few 8Cs, but mostly 6Cs at the time. And they decided that they needed to step up the game. And they were also basically broke at the time, but Mussolini was paying for it before the war. So this is what they had. And they created basically two engines, and they were both prototypes. So the S10, which is up on the right-hand side, is a V12, 60-degree V. And then the S11 down below is a V8. And these engines were done as prototypes and built all aluminum, wet sleeved, and so forth. And the basic architect of these was Colombo. And we all know Colombo, Colombo then ended up going to Ferrari and so forth. So when you look and you see that Guido Colombo was Ferrari's #1 engineer, and the S10, the 12-cylinder, became the Ferrari engine that we know today, the V12 single overhead cam we know today. So they basically, like many other things at Ferrari, started at Alfa Romeo, and they took the technology, engineering, and so forth, and walked across, basically went to Modena, not across
the street. It's a big street.
Big street, and so forth. So that is what it is. So basically, we're going to talk about the S11, which is the V8, and it was the engine that was basically had a bigger run than the other engine had. And at the time, Alfa Romeo basically drew cars, you can see the sketches down below, of what they were proposing at the time. And they are very unique in a sense. They were unitized bodies. Nobody had done unitized bodies before, but Alfa decided they could save money doing this, and they could make the cars a little bit more robust, and the original cars were going to have the V8 in them. But this is the big thing. It really didn't work very well, and the war came, so nothing really happened. And today, we do not know whether any of these cars were actually built, because there's no documentation, there's no pictures, there's no nothing other than these sketches, and they made them. But on one of the other resources that I was able to delve into, the Corto, which is built in Alfa Romeo in 1938, was basically where they tested the V8 engines, the S11s. And I have that, and that's also documented. So the car that's upstairs just happens to have a Corto chassis underneath it. And at the time it was built, I did not know that, but it's That's what we know today.
So now how many of these V8 engines? They only made, what, 3 of the engines that we know of?
They made 3 engines. Fusi, who's the documenter, because he ran the archives for, he said they made 2, and I have all 3.
He has
So
all 3 of the
that-
2. Great.
So
That's good.
that's where it starts and so forth. So the engine up on the right-hand side, up on that, is the first engine I was able to acquire. And that was out of Regini's junkyard outside of Modena. And that's the way I got the engine and so forth. And a friend of mine from overseas said, hey, there's going to be something coming up. Somebody's found this V8 engine. It's a prototype. Very few people know about it. Would it interest you? And I said, absolutely. But I don't know anything about it. But anyway, so it was one of those things, you could buy it for cash. So I had a friend go get the thing, and then I ended up with the engine, and that's a picture in my shop on the right-hand side. That's what I got. So then on the left-hand side down below, that's number 3 engine, which I acquired a couple years ago and so forth. And that's the one, the engine that's actually in the Fusi book, because there's actually a picture. Now, the one thing I want to go backwards a little bit, the S11 and the S12 were both designed to be single overhead cam engines for the street use and double overhead cam engines for racing. And the actual S10 was actually built as a double overhead cam and raced a little bit, which is the 412. So it looks like an HC 2900 body and so forth, but they put the V12 double overhead cam, only raced for a very short period of time because of the war. And the S11 that I have, they were only made in single overhead cam. That's all they were made.
There was drawings of the dual overhead cams.
There's drawings
Yep,
of
and
them
the Fusi book has it.
and
Yeah.
the Fusi book has the drawings.
Funny.
But these are what were made. Yes.
Okay. All right.
So
So trying to do research, you mentioned the Fusi book a couple of times, but when you're trying to figure out an engine that was just a prototype and there's not a lot of information about it, where do you go to get information?
well, the interesting thing on the engine that I bought out of the junkyard, the quote was, "The stupid American bought that engine, and it's junk, and it's frozen, and it's full of water." That'd be the stupid American here, and so forth. And when I got it home, I put it onto the bench, and I started moving the flywheel, but it was frozen. It wouldn't do it. And I said, I think I got junk here. And I moved it with a screwdriver, and a little bit of pea gravel came out underneath it. And I'm going, this is interesting. So I pulled the flywheel off, poured the pea gravel out, and then the engine turned right over. It had been pickled, but it was outside, and on the top of the engine, some water had gotten into it. So what happens is, of course, the water is down below in the sump, the oil comes back up, and you pull the dipstick, and you're going, oh my God, it's full of water, because the bottom of the dipstick has water in it. That's all true. But the engine was actually very, very nice inside, because it was all pickled. But you could see in those pictures there. And I think from basically de-engineering the engine, there's a picture of our friend Henry Ford up there, which has got a flathead Ford. And if you look at the architecture between the 2 engines, the S11 and a flathead Ford in the day, they're very, very similar. The combustion chamber is a pear shape. The timing order is the same. I think that Alfa went and got a V8 basically and said, wow, this is a flathead. This works pretty good. Let's put overhead cam on the thing, and we got an engine, and we don't have to think the whole thing through. And I think that's exactly what happened. A quicker way to do that. So anyway, that's what happened. And then along the way, I was really, really fortunate to have a good engineer that worked with me, took the engine all apart, analyzed the whole thing, tried to figure out what it was and everything else. And trial and error, I got basically the engine to run and immediately blew it, just like Alfa. So Alfa blew up every one of the engines because the head gasket is a real challenge, and the heating is a real challenge on it. And the other thing we figured out that Alfa had made a number of mistakes in the engine. And because there's such a short period of time on the development of them, they never finished the development. The war came and the whole thing was shelved. It was so expensive. At the end of the war, nobody wanted to put up their hand and say, we had anything to do with it. So the whole thing just went away.
One of the pictures you showed me, there was you see the front of the engine, and there's these little metal plates that are screwed, held in plates, and behind them are little hydraulic pumps. Well, it's clearly, this is just part of the development. They're trying to figure out what's the best way to do this? Let's put these openings here so we can change things as we go. And they're figuring it out. It's obviously early development.
It's early development, and like Fred said, there's a number of changes. Each one of the engines is different. Being a smart engineer, which I think some of the time I am, I thought, well, if I buy one, I'll get another and another. Well, each one of them are different. And there's differences in the original one, number one engine that I was able to purchase out of Germany. That has a flat crank on it, a very rudimentary intake and exhaust on the thing, and a very, very different engine. I was able to get it run after I threw flame out of it and everything else because I had all the timing wrong. Oh, this will be the same. I'll just make it run. No, it's all different. So forth on that. And what has happened here is that in the early days, because of the way the engines were built, the engine compartment is very, very narrow because it was all built for inline engines. So with a V8, we have a problem now. So what's unique to this engine, the S11, the intake and the exhaust are together inside the V and Siamese with water running through them. So if you think about all of what I just said, that's complicated, and you can really mess that up real easy. So the combination of that, and also it's a wet sleeve engine, all aluminum with floating sleeves. So to seal that engine and so forth is a real challenge. It took me 3 times. Alfa never did get it right because the engines are all full of stop leak. And you can tell because the early stop leak is basically looks like bad eggs inside. And that's what it is. All the engines are full of it. And the other thing is, if you think about a steel liner, the steel liner, all of them have rust on the outside because of cooling. But when they have rust on the inside, that would be a problem because you're getting moisture in there. And so they were having problems with this. And in the development, they were blowing head gaskets. And you can see on all of the engines I've taken apart, you can see failures in all the head gaskets. So it took me 3 shots to finally get it. And the head gaskets that are in the car upstairs that works, and it's been that way now for 5 years, I built the head gaskets. So they're very unique and they actually work. And hopefully they still work today.
So I love it. So now Alfa I think you mentioned already, Alfa didn't finish this development because the war came along. So this got shelved. They didn't pick it back up after the war. They just went ahead and decided, nope, we're done with this, and tried something else.
They realized that during the development of it, it was so expensive to build the thing, and the budget was completely blown up with the thing and so forth. And what they had done is there was some testing that was being done. And so Alfa bought an inline Buick, straight 8, took one of the 6C 2500 pre-wars, and they basically took the Cordo with a V8 in them, and they ran them around Milan, and then the big test was take them up to Lake Como, and we're going to race them around the lake. Well, the Alfa died. The Buick won. That's not a good thing, and so forth. And the other car just went area, and they had issues with sealing. They also had issues with a heating problem. So Alfa decided, well, we'll just put 20% alcohol in and that'll fix it. It didn't fix it. They still blew it up. So one of the engines I have has really been blown up. The one that's in the Fusi book, the number 3 engine, black one, looks really pretty because they had basically painted it beautiful with all the bad internals inside of it. And I bought it because it looked really pretty.
Yeah.
And it was in the book. And obviously it was because the last engine would be great. It was total junk. That's what happens.
So when you're looking at those engines, can you tell what their plans were? Because they didn't have the time to finalize their plans. Could you tell what they wanted to do for a transmission? Like, were they going to put a transmission on a transaxle? What were they thinking?
It's really hard to figure this out because when you get it to the bell housing in the back of the engine, the bolt pattern doesn't fit anything. I have worked on 6C pre-war 2300Bs, 23s, and 2500s. And they have an Alfa transmission that bolts up. None of the bolt patterns are the same. Flanges is different on the thing. So I don't know exactly what they were planning on. But the third engine, which is the one I think they blew up at the end, it had a special basically casting on it with a big bearing in it. And what they were doing, I think, is running a drive shaft out of that with a bearing and having a transaxle axle in the back, similar to what an 8C is, 2900 with a transaxle axle in the back and so forth. And in that one, there's nothing in there for clutch, flywheel. I mean, the flywheel's there, no clutch, pressure plate, or anything else is in there. But it's beautifully done. It bolts right up, but there's not an answer to it. I don't know. So what I decided I would do is put a transmission in and use that. And then with a Corto, I'm getting a little ahead of the story, but I bought a car in Switzerland called a Corto because at that time I was working on doing some research and doing some work on an HC 2900. So I had parts book of a 29 and a 2300B. And I started looking at numbers, and the numbers were lots of the same numbers and so forth. I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this project, I need to get some of these parts. So buying a donor car would be really, really important. But finding one, they're very, very rare. They made very few of them pre-war, but they're built exactly the same time as an HC 2900. But it has an Alfa body on it, not a touring body on it. But the parts are very, very similar, and some of them are the same.
So when you did this, you chose to make then, and basically an HC 2900 look and feel based on the knowledge, the donor car, what you think Alfa should have put that thing in the first place.
Well, at that time in the war, all the HCs were basically being built for racing or for grand touring. So you can see the Mille winning car up on the right-hand side. There's a Mille car, race car. Those are both 29Bs. And I decided if they were to do this and in a short production and so forth, the first thing they would do is put it in the same body, same chassis and so forth, which would be a 2900B. So I decided the best looking car in my mind is an HC 2900. And that car right there happens to be where I've got all of the information. That car is owned by John Mozart.
Not a bad choice. I mean, it's a phenomenal. I mean, I don't think everybody here would agree. John has a great car, but what they see in the lobby up there is phenomenally beautiful.
Well, John is a good friend, and John and I have done work together. And I called John and I said, here's what I'd like to do. I would like to copy your car and basically build another car with the prototype V8 engine and the thing. And he said to me, absolutely not. You think I'm crazy? I got the best car in the world. And then he said, long pause, he said, when do you want the car? Next week?
Oh, the Alfa family comes through once again. Yay.
Yes. So basically, I did some research, hired a couple of people through friends of friends, and we basically took John Mozart's car and put it in a white room, which is very important to do. And we digitized the whole car. Took us 3 days and put it all onto computer.
I'm picturing like this little 12-year-old kid who's tech savvy sits down and says, sure, I can do that for you.
No, it's actually an older guy who's a hot rod guy that decided he wanted to do that. There's only one problem. He could do it, he could digitize it and all that and put it on the computer. But then to go ahead and use it, you got to put it into SolidWorks and something else. And he said, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that wasn't the answer because I had paid him to do it. So a friend of a friend, again, this is a coordination of many different people. We were able to find a person and basically Pixar, and he is incredibly talented. So basically when you're doing a scanning, you only have to scan half the car, and then you can just flip it and put it together. So the blue picture on the left-hand side is Mozart's car completely scanned. And then we can take it and go to the right side of the picture there, and we can put it into SolidWorks. So you basically can look at the car and you can say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and you slice it like bread. And then you can get all the different lines in there and you put it into CAD and all the rest of it. And the reason to do that is because we basically needed to build a buck. And the buck itself is basically water jetted out of
cardboard? Cardboard?
No, that wouldn't be cardboard.
Ah, I'd
That
make
would
it out
be-
of cardboard.
That would be actually aircraft plywood that is straight and strong, and it also is birch plywood. The interesting thing is, if you look at it carefully, you'll see some numbers and other things in. We could do then, and I worked with this gentleman at Pixar, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, "Okay, we'll just make it like Legos. You can take it apart, put it together, and so forth." So there's numbers on everything, and you can see when we want some detail, we double up the amount of slices. So there's more slices there. There's less slices we go through. So the whole thing is put together. And the important thing, and I totally missed it, when you do this with a water jet, and this is water jetted in Las Vegas, it could have been actually done up here because the machine was from up here, but didn't know that at the time, that you end up with a male and a female. And so all I cared about is that I can see my car. It's going to happen, maybe. But the gentleman, I pick all the stuff up in my trailer, and he says, "David, take the female." I'm going to throw it away. I just burn it. Take it. I said, "Why?" Maybe you might eat it someday.
I heard rumors that we might even see it being used in this slide deck.
We might.
We might.
And we might understand it is as important for what I did or how this car came together, that the female portion of the buck and the male portion have so much, well, they were cut together, so you end up with both of them. But I mean,
If one's
they're
correct,
really
the other one's
important.
correct. And
They're
both.
really important. And the female, without it, you couldn't build the car, I don't think. You couldn't build it at the way we were going to build it.
So the next challenge is you got to get your donor car. You gotta
So I had figured out the donor car, and so I put out the word all over Europe. I need an 6C 2300B Corto. Now, that happens to be the car I was able to buy. That's in Switzerland. And there's a story behind it, a quick one. It's called the Celery Car because it looks like celery. It doesn't smell like celery, but it looks like it. So my wife named it the Celery Car, and I drove it around a little bit, and everybody kind of laughed at it, but they didn't know what was up the sleeve, what I really wanted to do. So the gentleman that you're looking at the car, he's had that for 35 years parked inside a heated garage. Unbelievable. It's not for sale, but life changes. Then it became for sale. So the other thing is
But
getting.
Mr. Smith, are you going to take care of my car the way I have for 35 years?
We
and
don't talk
baby it?
about that.
Oh,
We just
okay.
say we really,
I just
we
thought I'd
just
check.
say we need the car. But here's another little part of this thing. Getting cars out of Switzerland is a little bit difficult if you read into that. So the car has to be exported to Germany for some service work. Thank you very much. Goes into the EU, goes to another, goes to another, goes to another, anyway, and then ends up coming home here. So
Nice.
the car
Nice.
comes home,
But-
and
Obviously, a few parts had to come off of that thing if you're going to use it as.
well, we start looking at it and
yeah.
start measuring it because I've got it in my mind. We're just going to be able to take the body off and do a little bit of this. But the firewall, which is the gray portion there, that's 1.5 feet off where a 2.9 should be. 1.5 feet. That's a lot of, it's not inches. That's a lot. And all this doesn't work. But the whole car comes completely apart. And the important part is the chassis and the running gear, because a lot of it is exactly 2.9. Same wheelbase, same other things.
It's all made at the same time, made the same
made
way.
same time, same place, all the rest of the stuff. So we're going to take these parts, put them on this car and this car. Same thing. Very
So
important.
now you have the engine, or actually engine. So,
Engine.
oh, we only have one at this point. You're still in the
engine.
process. All right.
One engine.
And,
It's not running.
You've got the body buck, so you now know what the shape of the car is going to be.
Yes.
You've now got your donor car, and
Yes.
you've just disassembled it. Well, now comes the next step, and that's starting to put it back together as a car, right? I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay.
But there's all these other issues. So we have to kind of go into this real quick here, and I'm going to sidestep again. I'm on eBay one night, and I'm not an eBay junkie, but I see a drawing of an 8C 2900 for sale to hang in your garage. And I'm going like, this is great. I buy it. Then I talked to the man and I said, do you know where there's any more of these? Well, yeah, I have a friend. Okay. So a friend has more. So I called and I get to talk to the friend. And I said, where did you get these drawings? Well, I have a friend. He lives in Argentina and he has all the Alfa pre-war drawings of a 2.9. So we do a little negotiations. I get him, I email him, and he's very, very nice. And he says, yes, I will sell them. And I'm figuring that he's going to retire on these drawings because I'm the stupid American. But he was really nice. And he said, send me $500 US and I'll send you the thing. And I think I'm going to get 3 drawings. I get a stack like this. It weighs its tonnage of drawings. And there's drawings of everything. There's
Wow.
parts, there's engine, there's components. Every little part of an 8C2900 is there, including the chassis with all the dimensions and all the angles on the chassis. Heaven. This is the biggest part.
I'm planning on buying a couple from you, so I'm starting to stack up my money right now.
So anyway, this is a real part, something that actually made this actually happen. And I didn't realize I really needed them, but because anything you do, there's the chassis there, there's got to be a structure there to hold everything. If you don't know what it is, you're going to have a real problem. And especially to hold a body and not see any of it and get it correct. It's really difficult.
Well, and you obviously are trying to make it correct. You're trying to make it accurate for what the other 8C2900s
Correct.
would look like,
Yeah.
plus adapt it for your car.
Right.
So,
And there has to be some modifications made. And you can see that there's big steel channels and box sections through because you put it what's called a strong back. So you basically take the chassis and you weld it to this so it doesn't move around because you're going to be adding heat and cutting and doing stuff, and you don't want to lose the integrity of that chassis.
nice. Nice. So then from the chassis, once you had the chassis, then you could start putting on things like suspension pieces. So you was the suspension out of the donor car?
Yes. The suspension there, and I had mentioned that, if you look at the suspension, it's exactly the same as a 2.9. It's a little bit lighter in a couple things. The big spring pots and the shocks are not on it, but it's basically trailing arms suspension. All of that was designed from Ferry Porsche. So the whole suspension on this car, independent suspension, Ferry Porsche was basically contacted, and Alfa bought drawings and the patents to basically build the 6C 2300B and some of the 2900 8C 2900B and the 6C 2300 also. It's all Porsche, and they paid him and they gave him a couple of cars. So this is Porsche. If you look at it very carefully, the difference is it's beautifully done. All of that information there on those trailing arms, it's all done in needle bearings. It's not bushing, it's all needle bearing. It's beautifully done, and it works really well. And also on the back, it's hard to see, but it's just trailing arms. So if you look at a Porsche or a Volkswagen, there it is. It just happened early before the war, and it's Porsche.
Nice, nicely done. All right, so then after you working on you got chassis, you got the suspension starting to come together. Then you even made a fuel tank, which is kind of funny because fuel tanks are usually not very visible, and yet you went out of your way to make the right shape. You made it out of aluminum, but you made the right shape and you put it in the right place. What's the thought process? I mean, nobody's going to see it.
But the architecture is like a home. If you know where all the different parts of the home's going to be, you can build a pretty nice home. But if you don't know where they're going to be, something's going to be messed up. So it's very unique to have the fuel tank sitting on top of the chassis. Also, there's a reason why it's that shape and it fits there, and there's very little space around it. And it's with the drawings, of course, you can build something like that. And I wanted to build out of aluminum because I wanted to save weight and there's no corrosion involved. So you can also, underneath, there's saddles. Saddles were in the drawings. You can build the saddles, and you build it all, and it fits. I had a different vendor build that. He actually is an aircraft fabricator. He built that out. And when I got it, going, okay, here it goes. And he was great, boom, sits right in
Nice.
the right place.
Well, the other fun part I know is you start to build onto that chassis. You're starting to make the firewall and the pieces that the body structure is going to be attaching to. Then you can see where those female pieces from the body buck that you were trying to throw away suddenly became so extremely valuable.
You can see on there, those are the females, and you could put them exactly where we want to in the stations. And now you can see inner structure that's going to hold the aluminum body being built in there. And there's numbers on them. You can take them off and everything else. So you basically have the outside of the car, but it's the female part of it. So you can see where everything fits and so forth. And you can see now they've dropped the engine in, and the engine had to be, the melder mats had to be built because this chassis is for a 6C. It's not for the 8C. It's not for the so forth. So you can see there's the engine in there. There's the inner structure on the thing right there. And that all has to be lined up and done. So the engine, of course, there's just the shells of the engine and so forth, but you can see what's going on. And so that happens, and then the end. Oh, let's go back, Fred. Can you go back?
Get carried away.
Come on.
Come on, come on.
Look, okay. So on the right-hand side, that's my shop at home there, and I'm basically starting to build up the engine for the car and so forth. So the intake manifold has to be built. That's all fabricated and built.
And as we talked, as we was talking about the inside exhaust. This is the exhaust right here coming out. And you notice that the exhaust comes out of the inside of the engine, and the intake for the air, for fresh air, is coming right here. So you're combining everything on the same inside edge, because the old narrow cars didn't have room for the exhaust coming out.
And then
tapered hood.
I'm going to grab this.
Uh-oh.
Oh, don't touch.
you
Okay,
have the right
right
to do
here
that?
is where the
Who's in
starter
charge?
goes. And then up here is a generator, and right underneath here is the water pump, because you have all the space to do that. So this is what's happening. And now I'm trying to figure out, this is a pre-war bell housing, sorry, and so forth. So I'm starting to fit up things like that and saying, okay, I'm going to have to build something in there, so I need that. But the other thing that's very different, when these engines were originally built, they had an intake manifold in here, and it looked like a giant turtle. Just think of a giant turtle with arms out, because it is. It's just like a turtle. It's got the big four, so just like the turtle. But they had this little tiny carburetor on the thing, and it's like, that wouldn't run it wouldn't run anything. So they had necked the thing down. They also had water in this thing, and the fuel flow had to go here, 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 around and in. It was a horrid design. It was a Friday afternoon with too much red wine. It was horrible. So basically, I had a friend of mine, and we fabricated this, and we put 2 real carburetors. Now, these are pre-war Webers on here to begin with. And a pre-war Weber is kind of a rudimentary thing, and it's a big brass carburetor. And I'll say this, it's kind of gross to say it, but it kind of works like a toilet. You flush it on, you flush it off. So it doesn't work real well. But that's what went on, because that's what they would have used at the time. Today, it's got very early 1950 Webers on it, because they're much more refined, and it actually works really well.
You can drive it a little easier.
And
now.
it drives really well now.
So,
So
nice.
that's the, so here's where the cams are. Here's the cams are here, and so forth. So there we go.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. Now, I'm back.
Okay.
All right. So now you got the engine, you got chassis. You starting to build the structure, but lo and behold comes the steering, which now doesn't fit.
Well, if you think about an inline engine here, you're going, okay, what are we going to do? The steering for the car should be in here. Oops. Now it's out here, because look where the head is right here. And right in there is the fuel pump going right through the steering. Oops, another problem. So this is already in the car, and we're having to figure out how to do all this. And we don't want to change up here, which is the geometry of the car, the way it was designed and so on, because they actually work really well. I had a 6C 2300 million car, and it drives really, really well. So I don't want to screw that up. And here we've got the other. So this is the next challenge here. And when you start messing with this, it's, you have to really pay attention because the car is either going to steer, it's going to be horrid, or it's going to kill you. So you don't want that to happen.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. All right. But these are just the challenges that
These
you're
are challenges.
trying to figure out because Alpha never got to this point.
No.
So-
And what you're doing is you're unraveling this as you go because there's not all the answers. Nobody's got the answers. There's not a play. There's no manual for anything. There's how do you do it, everything else. I'm unwinding this thing as I'm going. And also I'm employing and working with other people that may have more expertise because this is a combination of getting really bright people to help you to work with things because none of us know everything.
I
He
love it.
does, but
I know
none of
everything.
us know. Okay, okay, go ahead.
So then you went to Tire Rack, ordered up some tires and wheels.
Yeah, yeah, those
Yeah.
are tire rack.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are on special
Oh,
this
yeah.
week.
I'm thinking,
Now, from my other early days, Barani has been bought by a corporation in the Netherlands. They also own Touring. And with that, they have all the original drawings of a Barani wire wheel. So the wheels that are on the car upstairs, those wheels there, those are exactly HC 2900 wheels, and offset is correct, amount of spokes is correct, everything is, because it's made off the original drawings and they were made for me for the car.
nice.
So
nice.
there was another part of the puzzle, but without Barani in business, never would have happened. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Because a 2.9 wheel is a special wheel,
They're not readily available,
No.
that's for sure.
even a tire rack.
Not even a Tire Rack. So, okay, so now you got wheels for the car. You're starting to now make body panels as well for the car. So body panels, did your buck work the way you planned? Is it-
Yes, the buck actually works really, really well. And this is different. A normal Italian car is built by beating metal on stumps and everything else like that. That's how they form metal. But the two gentlemen that did the body on this car, they were very, very versed on an English wheel. So these were made on an English wheel. And oop, here we go. So the other thing is, if you polish the two wheels on an English wheel, you can see how shiny it is. You can really see the shapes and so forth. And it's built like basically like a patchwork quilt. So there's a seam there, a seam there. And once you get it into certain places on the thing, and also there's one of the front wings, you can see stretch, actually there's shrinking marks here and so forth like that. You get to a certain point, put it onto the buck, get it fit really, really well, and then you drill it here, here, and here, put it together. I think everybody knows what the word cleco is. You put it together with clecos, and then you basically cut on both sides and you butt weld it. And butt welding is very, very hard to do because we're doing it with aluminum and we're butting it and we're doing it with a torch. We're not heliarching it, we're doing it with a torch. That way you don't get a stress riser on either side of it and you can put it back through the wheel and plenish it back out. So that's it. Now there's
Amazing.
also one other thing. I'm going to interrupt Fred again.
Oh, no problem.
And these are the louvers that go in alongside the engine bay. And each one of these is different. And they're put together individually, then they're welded to a back, and then they're put this frame around. And the frame has to be, in the cars, were chrome. So that has to be a brass piece, and then that fits in. So each one of these is built, cut, fitted, and put in. And both sides are different because there's a left and a right. So here again, you couldn't buy those at Chuck's or at Napa. So we had to make them.
Nice. I like it. You know, there doesn't sound like a lot of easy steps in this. I keep thinking one of these times you're going to say, well, then there was this easy step, but I haven't heard that.
Well, part of it is there's a lot of things that happen, and a lot of things have to happen in this. Of course, the drawings, the donor car, the engine, but also being able to source friends that had these cars. So I could go back and say to my friend in New Jersey, what do the louvers look like? What do they look like? And so forth. And so I get, you know, all these pictures and dimensions and everything else like that. Without that, you're guessing, and guessing is not a good thing.
So you've got the car now sitting on wheels, the chassis, you got the engine in, you think it's going to work, all these things. So then you got a few body panels on it. I hear rumors that you wanted to take it for a little test drive, and it's still long from being finished, but you wanted to take it for a test drive. And your justification was it was going to test it? Is that right?
You have to test it. Is it real?
I-
Can you really make
You just
this
wanted to
thing?
drive it.
True. I wanted to see if it'd go. So this is in basically my front yard, and my shop is to the left of here. And this is the day of reckoning. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? So you can see I need a little guy here. You can see the accommodations here. This is the seat, which is right out of a packing blanket. Here's the dashboard. Oh, here's a couple gauges, very carefully taped on, everything else. Now, I've tried individually thing. Now, this little number here is supposed to make the car go straight. So we have to do that.
Yeah.
And we've got a radiator in there. I have run the engine in the basement, not on a dyno. I've run it in the basement. I think it's going to work. Okay. So we have our wheels here, and we're going to get into this later, but I've got the grill shell, I've got the radiator, and here's the steering, and there it's attached to a wheel, and there's a transmission and all of that. So I always have a co-pilot. It's my son,
Poor victim.
and he doesn't get a choice. We're going for a ride. So Spencer gets in and said, Dad, I don't want to do this. I said, yeah, come on, you're going to. I don't have anything to hold on to. I said, you can hold on to me. Well, where are we going to go? I said, we'll go around the block. No, we aren't going around the block. So we go around the block. Okay, it's kind of working okay. So then you got to you really got to test it. So, okay, 80 miles an hour on 405, we bring it home. And I'm sure everybody's going like, oh my God, there's the crazy guy again, but I brought it home.
Yeah.
Because to finish the car now and have a major problem, then you got to rip it all apart. You sure as heck don't want to paint it. You don't want to do anything, because if you got to tweak on stuff and do something, now is the time. The patient is in a wheelchair, but you can still work on the patient. It's not home, not going to the dance yet. We got to make sure it's going to work. So this is the reckoning day.
Yeah, 80 miles an hour. The WSP is not in the room.
No, there's no license plate. It all
it.
works. It's experimental.
All right. So you mentioned that grill. That grill is phenomenal. I mean, that thing, those things, are those things just readily available? Is that something you made that, or?
So the grill itself is the brass piece. Now, another friend of mine I've worked with before lives outside of Milan, and he's restored a couple of 6C 2300Bs. And again, if you start looking at part numbers, the 6C 2300B grill shell is the exact same grill shell that's on an 8C 2900. And I said, is there any way you could make one? He says, I have a friend who's got an actual buck for one of those things. He will make the outside of you if you send me a whole bunch of euros. Okay, so I send him a whole bunch of euros, and what happens is this portion here, not this flange and stuff, it comes in a big box. So we have this around here, which is this, but it's not fit to the car. We don't have this flange. There's an actual inner flange in here. There's also all the stuff to hold basically the crosshatch grill, which I had made. That was water jetted here and actually in Auburn and so forth. So you got to do all that. And this is really tough to do. This really takes a skill because it's soldered together and it's brass. And to do this and to get it to go around here, that has probably been annealed, 8 to 20 times to get it to actually do that, and then fit it and back up here and all that, because the hood fits into this, everything else fits into this. There's a lot of stuff going on into that, and it all has to fit. So here it is all fit up here, and then we put what we call the chin on it and all of that. So there's a lot going on. There's a tremendous amount of hand work in that thing.
Now that's brass. Well, you were doing aluminum on the rest of the car. Why is that brass versus the aluminum?
Because it's plated. And that's the way it was. That's the way they originally built. Yeah. And it was originally done that way. So we're going to do that and so forth. And at this point here, you can see there's still this, but now We're a little bit ahead of this game here, but here's the wings on the car. And the wings were built independently of the car down in Oakland, because I have a really good metal man up there. And I said, can you do it? And he said, I got a time to do it, so I'll do it. And we were running out of skill and time up here and so forth. And now you can see also the front bumpers here on there and so forth. There's also a trim piece on it. And those were built in New Jersey. Another good friend that had it and so forth. And the gentleman that built it, this piece here is all one piece.
Yep.
They're just one piece. And those were built, and the gentleman did it. His forte is building specialty tanks for motorcycles. And he's really, really good. And he's a really nice guy. And he just happens to be, his last name is Gambino. And he is part of the family. So he got paid really quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
And he did the
Love it.
front and the back, and beautiful, and it fit. So again, they don't just bolt up, but you're not way off here or anything else like that. And then the trim around there, I built those, basically the bumpers, or excuse me, the bumpers out of wood, because the trim has to be, that's another piece that has to fit it. So you have to beat on it and nail it and all that stuff. So another thing is to hold the windshield here.
This is just, very unusual pieces you don't think about. This is very hard to make.
It's really hard to make. So part of digitizing the original thing is a pattern was made, which is the pattern right here. And with that, we could see that, yeah, we're good. So this was all digitized. Again, this was then put onto SolidWorks. These are solid pieces of aluminum here. There's one and there's one here. So this is put on a CNC and carved. So you can see them right here like that. And then they come off here. These are actually aluminum. And I flew this aluminum down to California to get this done. This is actually my friend who works at Pixar, has these machines, because he makes puppets for Pixar. And he's really, really good. So these are the pieces here to fit up in there. And it's a unique piece to a 2.9. And fortunately, we had it digitized so we could do it.
Nice, 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 nice. So you're getting closer. You're getting body panels on. The car's now been run, and you know it works.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next one, which then should be easy. Now you got to start doing the door panels. You've done the 3D rendering, so you should have a digital file for all this. Is that digital file?
No. There's a giant screw up. We're going to go backwards a little ways because there's a giant screw up. When we did the buck and so forth, we did it. You can see the buck is here. You can see it here. Okay. So this is sitting on the buck. The problem is, this is the door opening here. Here's a hinge, here's a hinge. And here's the real deal here. And there's openings here, and there's a scoop here, and there's all these openings. They were never in the book. Where are they? Where are they going to be? Are they here? Are they here? What's the angle? What's this? And when I was down, because the car was being worked on down in California, and we were close to Sears Point, and we drove by for lunch, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a 2.9B. It was Ray Shear's car, which is the sister car to this car. And I'm going like, what is that doing there? It just so happened it needed to go to Phil Riley's to have a bunch of engine, transmission, and rear end work, transaxle work. So I called Phil Riley, and Ivan said, come over, do whatever you want. I'm going to have the car for 2 months. So David's over there with his paper and making patterns of all the openings and so forth. Because without those, we would never, ever be able to do these. And we're a little bit out of sequence here, but this is how it happens. It's a little here, a little bit there. But to put this all together, it's not just in the Northwest. This is over the world. There's Argentina, there's Milan, there's Germany, there's, the Netherlands. It's all over here. And David's going to a lot of swap meets.
Yeah.
I love swap meets. It's finding the treasures, because all the bits and pieces, I've got the parts list. And I'm going to go ahead and get every piece of this car as close as I can get it to a 2.9. So when you look upstairs and you see these things, all the gauges, all the switches, all the pumps, all that stuff is exactly what you'd find in a 2.9 today, a real one.
So a couple of cars helped, a couple of different talented people with computers helped. You're traveling around with pencil and paper helps, and swap meets helps.
Yes.
All right, I'm taking my notes as we go.
Okay.
So the next trick is going to be putting the bumpers on. You mentioned them already, so we'll just touch real fast on this.
This
Come
is
on,
the back
Bill.
one, and Adam's hand is up there. We're at Wicked Fabrication in Auburn right now, so you can see the car. We're working on bits and pieces of it, and
But
so
it's getting
forth.
close. I mean,
It's getting very
starting to
close.
look like
There's
a
a
car.
piece of plywood which becomes the windshield. The louvers have tape over them. There's some actual Corello headlights from the day from an actual
2.9.
2.9 because they didn't want to restore them, and I found out about them.
Yeah.
So David restored them. So those
Nice.
actual headlights came off a car from the factory, a build of a 2.9.
Any car I know?
You might know it.
Okay.
They used to live in the
Uh,
Bellevue.
uh,
Okay.
Yeah, and the replacement headlights that we bought showed up the day before Pebble Beach.
Sometimes that happens. And the head.
Otherwise, we would have had to go back and get them back
and
from you.
Another story is the headlight lenses are special Corellos. They say Corello in the center. And fortunately, the gentleman that Fred Russell worked for had a mold made back east for lots and lots and lots of money.
Yeah.
And so we have the actual headlights. So the actual ones are there. And that's what we've got in both cars and many cars too. So
The things like those headlights and others, I can't imagine they're just not readily available on the shelf. How about trim, like the trim on the side of the car? Are there people out there making it for 2.9s? Is that something that's? you
well,
can find?
again, if you go back and you look at the parts book, the 2.9 trim is the same as a 2300B. And some of those cars, because there's lots of those built, they have the trim, but it's just a raw extrusion. Okay, so it's just a raw extrusion. And my friend, again, in Milan, Fabio, said, I can get you some of that raw extrusion. So the raw extrusion comes in a big tube from Italy after you paid a whole bunch of euros for it. And it's in big long 6-foot lengths. So if you look at these, it's aluminum. Okay, this is all aluminum here. So this trim here is aluminum. So it has to be fit to the cars, studs put in, welded here, welded there, and there's a groove in the top. So when you go upstairs and look at the car, you'll see that groove goes right to the end. That's done with a Dremel by hand. And it's done very, very well. Thank you, Adam.
That's a steady
And then
hand.
all of this, like these hinges, that all has to be made. This was found at a swap meet, and it's the right period, out of Italy and so forth. And these, I made them out of wood to begin with, and then I made them out of brass. But if you look at them, they're all angled in this and that. And the important thing, oh shoot, Fred, there it goes.
Did you break
I got it
something?
wrong. The important thing is there's a pin in there, and the pin has to be parallel all the way across, or it doesn't open.
Doesn't open.
Doesn't open. And the doors are the same way. There's a pin here and a pin here, and that has to be parallel. And the doors on these cars, they do not open out. They open out and up.
Slightly
They're
up.
self-closing. And there's nothing else. So all of this has to be fabricated, and all this has to be done by hand. And of course, at this point, to get it to fit, we're into first primer, because it got to fit really, really well.
So outstanding. But that wasn't the only trim. You
Nope.
also had some wood trim to make on the car that wraps around the passenger
Yes.
compartment. So you had to molds, or not molds, but you had any kind of samples to go off of? Just have to figure it
I
out.
had pictures of Mozart's car, and Mozart's car was a special one, the one we copied and digitized. That car has a special wood trim in it, and I wanted to do the same. So in my early days at the university, I had bought some very expensive hardwood because I was going to one day be making furniture. So this is Brazilian rosewood around here, and it's all one piece out of the same log. so it all matches and so forth. And you cut it, channel it, everything else and fit. This is in my shop at home because everybody complained it stunk so bad. They didn't want me around when I was working on this. And then I needed to fit it, took a while. And now you can see the finished CNC post in here. That's been fit into it and so forth. But that is all finished and done by hand. And also, then there's a matching piece across here, which is called the dashboard. And I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's all right. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So now you've got your trim figured out, getting closer, but now you can actually start painting body panels on the car. So the car's starting to get a little closer to reality. It's getting paint on it. You can see the
That's
wood
paint.
trim is sitting up there. There's even a little piece of the interior being worked on there. The moral story is you're getting closer on this
Getting
car as
very
it's getting
close.
there. And then, of course, comes the dashboard, which also has that same Brazilian
rosewood. Now,
on there. That's a lot of wood for coming up. Brazilian rosewood is not readily available. That
it's
is
illegal to have it,
nowadays.
basically, because it's out of the rainforest. So that was purchased
Gee.
in 1964 and 65 when I was boat racing, because I bought it basically when they could still get it a little bit, and it was bought in Miami, and I brought it home with me, and when I was boat racing, that's what that's come from.
Then you cut holes in it to put gauges in. The gauges, do those come out of the donor car?
The gauges came out, the two big ones came out of the donor car, and the rest of them have been sourced. So the electrical components of that car is all Bosch. In the early days, the Italians and the Germans really liked each other before the war. So Bosch was really good and they made great stuff. So the early Italian cars are all Bosch. But then the actual switches that are very important are Scintilla. They're Swiss. They're very, very rare for that car, but they're in there. And then there's also a chronograph for rallying and a couple other things in there. And
Got the little wiper motor, looks like
that's
right
Bosch.
there. Yeah.
And there's and the ignition switch and all that is Bosch, and everything electric in the car is Bosch. And so that was sourced from Essen, Germany, if I didn't have it, or some of it came out of the donor car.
Nice. But all of that has to be wired in at one point or another. And lo and behold, that means wiring diagrams probably don't exist readily, but I guess you have to figure it out.
You have to figure it out. So this is at home in my shop, and an Alfa pre-war is wired just like a house. So you just start laying out the wires and everything else. You can see the fuse boxes are up here, battery is sitting here. You can see different components here, wires hanging out of them. Once you get all the wiring done, then you got to do the ends of the wires and get them attached correctly. And then one thing that's interesting is all of it is sleeved. So I'll open up the car and you can see it's all sleeved. And once it is sleeved, it's in the car, because to get the sleeve to be the right color of the sleeving, it's got shellac on it. So when the shellac goes off on the sleeving, it gets hard so it doesn't move. So this is part of it, but suspension's all painted, all rebuilt. See an engine in here, engine mounts. Of course, the big wings are off and so forth, but you can see now this is back, the firewall is in, the steering is right here, and then it has to go, oops, jogs and goes this way. So you get the steering wheel in the right place because of the V8. And like I said, batteries here and so on and so on.
Nice.
So that's
Cool. You're getting there. You're getting there, getting close.
there.
And then from there, we step into the fact that now that your car is coming to the end, you have acquired all three of the engines during this process. What's the status on the other two engines? Since again, the S11, the most special thing about it is the rare engine. And you got all three.
Engine. That's what makes it special.
Yes.
So
what's the other ones?
So I need you, okay. The first engine is so rudimentary with the flat crank, engine number one, that's not. This is the engine, this is number two, which is in the car. This is the one that came out of the junkyard. And this is my engine stand that I run the engines with in the basement. So I can run the things right there, and I throw some exhaust out the door so I don't, kill myself. And so forth. But this it's also dual ignition. You run one side as a 4-cylinder, the other side is a 4-cylinder. There's some real tricks to this thing, flywheel and so forth, and all of that. And then this has got the dual carbs on it again. So now this is engine number 3. This is the last one that's the basic one that's pictured in the Fusi book. And this is the one that was blown up, so there's a big hole in it, which I've been fixing and everything else. And I am now working on it as a spare for the car. And this is a pre-war Formula One carburetor off a 158.
It's extremely rare.
Which is extremely rare and so forth. So it is run, but I had a head gasket problem because I couldn't get that material that I made it for anymore because it has asbestos in it. It's banned, you can't get it. So I built some other ones, they didn't work. So now I've got another set in there and this is in the shop now. And I've run it, but it will run again in probably another month or so.
So you have backup engines. You could just surprise us in a couple of years and put a different engine in there. And
Well, I also have a complete setup to blow one of these engines too,
yeah,
because they were all in the day, they were blowing engines. So that carburetor there fits on a 2-stage blower, which I someday would love to put right into here and put a 2-stage blower in there. Just because.
that'll be the next. That'll be our next talk.
you
Both
just-
how we did it and then what happened.
Yeah, and you can see here, there's exhaust there, and this is spark plugs here and so forth. So
Nice.
there we go.
All right. So now you've got engines. You've got the car. You've got to come. So let's just go ahead and remind everybody what the finished product looks like. So this is basically when it rolled out finished. Where did you first display the car as it
Okay,
to the
so
public?
the car was really trying to get it finished at the same, so it ended up going to the quail. And with the quail and so forth, because it's basically, I'm going to use the term, I hate the term, but I'm going to use it. So it's a Bitsa. It's got an original correct chassis underneath. It's got the original engine in it, but to make it all else work, there's bits of this and that. But if you look at it all together and you look at the components, they are the components of a 2.9 Alfa. It's very, very close to that, but it also has this brand new body on it. So it's not eligible for Pebble Beach, but I want to show the car. So it went to the quail. And Michael Lynch, before he passed away, did a very nice article on the car and so forth. So it's at Quail, and at Quail, they have the different circles with the different cars in it. And so there's Alfas and pre-war cars in my circle, and I win the circle, and then we go to this, and then we win that, and then we end up here with the cars for best of show and so forth, and people's choice. So I get this, David, we need to talk to you. Okay. We have a prestigious show and we could not have best of show go to a rebodied car. I hope you understand. You won, but you're going to get nothing. Thank you very much.
Move to the back of the line.
Yeah, back to the line. So it was at the Quail, but
Everybody liked it, obviously.
it's a beautiful car, but it has
Yeah.
a new body on
I
it.
love it.
So that's basically the story of the.
So how
the
long
thing.
did this, so from when you got that first call about that motor, which was the start of this bad habit that turned into such a beautiful car, to when you finished and rolled it out the door, how long did this process take?
It's a little under 5 years from the beginning of the thing all the way through trials, tribulations, setbacks, all the rest of it to being shown at the Quail.
Quail. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't have a job. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
And
really don't have a job.
surprisingly, a nice wife that allows him to do these things
Yeah,
too. So, we'll get to your question in just a second. You then also drove the car this year from Seattle down to Monterey.
Yes,
That's a couple
yes.
of miles. How'd that go? How did that drive?
So this was one of I've always wanted to see this, and it's a very difficult thing for me to do. I can make a pretty car because of my background and stuff, and I've done well at Pebble Beach and all that. So I really like doing that, but I also want to have the car run as well as it looks. I think that's the way cars should be. They're meant to be driven, they're meant to be used and so forth. But I have a problem with that because my engineering skills may not be here where the design skills are, so forth like that. So I was going to do it, take the car on, it went to a couple of very small little rallies, an hour here or there, and it always ran well, little bit of problem, but it's had some teething problems along the way and it's gotten better and better. So what happened is my wife and I wanted to do the Motoring Classic with Al McEwen from here to Pebble Beach. And we said, okay, we're going to do it. got canceled. Then we said, we're going to do it, and so forth. And Jody, my wife, said, why are you so nervous? And I said, I don't know if it's going to break. Alpha couldn't make it work. I mean, God, you know, when this
We got
thing,
1,700 miles. So,
yeah, but when it packs up, it's me, you know, I screwed up and I don't want to. So anyway, the good news is the car ran beautifully, 1,700 miles, 7,000 feet. And I ran it, you know, I've run it, just, you know, it's running absolutely beautiful. And I made it run. I'm very proud of that. Alpha couldn't make it run. I made it run, and it's done everything. My only issue is I got bad gasoline one part in California, so I lost a couple cylinders going over the Golden Gate Bridge. That's where you want to lose your car.
Yeah.
Oh shit! There's no place to turn off.
Where's that
you know?
bleep
Oh
button?
shit! You know, but what it was is I plugged a jet and I figured it out, fixed it, and other than that, the thing ran absolutely beautiful the whole way.
Good, nicely
And
done.
from here to there, 3/4 of 1 quart of oil. That's all it ate.
Any guess on kind of fuel mileage it gets?
Yeah, because the fuel gauge packed up and didn't want to work, so I have my stick and like that. So it actually gets about 18. If I'm really legging it, it's going to be less than that. But on the flats and stuff, 18, 19.
Okay, that's just crazy. Anybody? How many people here? Show of hands. How many people here have Alpha 8Cs at home? Okay. Well, the answer is 8C gets about 4 miles per gallon. Maybe 5 if you're really, really lucky.
If you're lucky.
And yet you were getting 18. Oh my gosh.
Well, it doesn't have
a little more
it doesn't
efficient.
have the blower. It's very efficient, and we did it the Italian way: power to weight, aluminum light.
Yeah.
Put it in. So I'm probably 1,000 to 1,500 pounds lighter than a normal, you know, AC 2900.
Yeah.
And this thing goes.
It does.
I mean, it goes down the mile. It's just fine. It goes. The other thing that was really very helpful is it was run before we went on the Pebble Beach tour. We put it on the in-floor dyno, so we could tune it really, really well. And we found some things that were wrong, fixed those and everything else. And it really made a difference on a thing, because you can try some things, but you can be off on ignition, you can be off on fuel flow, you can be off on a couple little things, and it doesn't matter. But when you're running on an in-floor dyno, you can just see the whole thing through each one of the progressions in the carburation, each where it's going. And we could run a thing at 80 miles an hour right there in front of us. And it's like, okay, we can see what's going on here. Big, big difference. So
I was going to ask the question, are you happy with the product? But I think I'm going to scratch that off. I think I know the answer to that.
yes.
They noticed that you saved the body buck as wall art down there at Wicked last time.
Well, the car was really, the majority of the work was done at Wicked Fabrication down in Auburn. And to begin with, they said, no, we don't want to work on it. No, it's foreign. No, no, no. And then after I got some work done, I pleaded again, did the, oh, please, please, please. And they finally said, yes, we will do the work, but we're going to give you a newer fabricator. Hope you get along with them. And there's one thing, you have to show up. You have to show up all the time. You have to bring us details. You have to bring us stuff. We don't have this stuff. We don't want to make a mess. So that was part of the deal. And I showed up, and absolutely great to work with. And Adam Hart did a lot of the metal work, most of it on there. Really, really good fabricator, great guy to work with, and so forth. And he said, when we were finishing up, I need to look at the buck. So I said, if you want to look at the buck, we'll do it. And says, there it is, hanging on the wall, Wicked Fabrication. So they're
Like
great, great guys to work
Nicely
with.
done.
They do wonderful hot rod work, and they also did some other work. Great.
Very, very cool. We have, are there any questions online from the chat room? Something throwing at us right now? So we had a question over here. You had a question, you want to throw that at us?
Engine number 2 that's in the car, said this was a 5-year process, so you procured that engine in 2016, is that correct?
So the question is, when did you procure that engine? Did you procure the engine in the car in 2016?
No. The car has been out and about for 5 years, so it's about a 10-year process. So we have to go back to right around, I think it's 2009 or 10 or something like that.
Do we know how many years that engine has been sitting dormant in that Bikini junkyard in Romeo?
So the
No.
question is that how long has the engine been sitting dormant while it was waiting for rediscovery by David here?
This is really hard to figure out because I have tried with Alfa, with everybody else to figure out how all this happened and the stories and all that. And it's really hard to piece it together because nobody wanted to stand up and say, hey, that was my project. So that's the first problem. Second problem is most of the people that worked on this are no longer around. That's what they're, and Alfa along the way has gone through some iterations. The museum had what we call, the basement where some real treasures were, and they've gotten rid of a bunch of that stuff. And I'll say this the best way I can. I think it's kind of a good old boys club, who gets to go down and who gets to pick and so forth like that. And I think that number 2 engine was probably the scabbiest or the roughest looking thing. And nobody really wanted to take it because number 1 engine didn't look bad. And number 3 looked really good because it was all painted up for the publication. And so when they're cleaning out and they're sweeping the floor, Regini's in there and say, just take it all, here's your money, and it ends up in Regini's junkyard. And nobody knew exactly because it wasn't visible for a while. And then somebody said, there it is, what is this? And unless you get into like the Fusi book and some of this other stuff, most people don't know it's ever happened. It's not a big known thing because it didn't work real well and it was expensive. So, and Ferrari's not going to say, oh, by the way, we copied Alfa. We took it all and we made Ferrari. Isn't this great? They don't want to say anything about it, but it's exactly what happened.
Any other questions? We got a question over here. So this hand first.
Besides the visual looking at the engines, is there any identification marks on the top, numbers or anything?
So the question is that, is there any identifying numbers or stamps or anything on the actual motors themselves?
Yes. Some of the castings so say S11. Now it's interesting because the engines are built at the same time. The water pumps both say S10 on them. There's some other parts that say S10. Filters say S10 on them, and they're on the S11. And the other thing is, like on the cams, there's all these very little inscriptions done with like a vibrograver and different things, this and that and so forth like that. There's also some, on the rods, like somebody signed this stuff. It doesn't make any sense to me because it doesn't follow any formats and there's no paperwork to back any of it up. So it's what you get is what you've got.
Sounds very Italian.
It's very Italian. And when I was taking it apart, what I was doing is photographing and trying to be very careful with it. So to figure out the torque readings and so forth is take a torque wrench and see when it breaks loose. But it was also rusty, so it's not a real good number on that. And so forth. So it's a lot of, quote, de-engineering. But the engines to make them run, use the rods, use the crank, and had new pistons made with good rings on them and that. And I have no idea what the cams are. So I just had them, refinished on the cams and so forth. And it's a chain driven, and the chain drives not only the cams, but the water pump and so forth. And it's a gear oil pump in the sump of the thing. So all of that's been pretty straightforward, but there are things like that. So when you're upstairs, you'll see in the valve covers, you'll see S11 that's actually in the valve cover.
Nice. We had a question over here too. You were next.
So Mozart's car has some slits in fender skirts on the back, and I noticed your car does
So-
not. What was the rationale
So
of that?
great question. It's the car that was copied from was John Mozart's car, and John Mozart's car has little openings in the rear fender skirts. So what's the deal why yours doesn't have that?
John and I have a gentleman's agreement on how this happened and what happened. So the first agreement is, yes, you can build the car, but you can build one. That was the first agreement. The second agreement that we have is the cars are not going to look identical. So they do not look identical. This car has some of, you know, the shape and everything is dead on. I mean, we're right on the money, but the trim and stuff is more like one of the other cars, not like John Mozart. And because of one of the signatures of John Mozart is the spats on the back. So I did a number of different ones, you know, and you keep getting closer and closer. And I finally said, no, we got to make this car different. We got to make it look different. And the other thing is, I wanted to paint the car black. And so I called John and I said, John, you know, I've got this big dilemma, car's getting ready for paint, all the rest of the stuff. And I really want to paint it black, but we have this agreement. We're not going to have the same car. And so there's this big pause and he says, paint the goddamn thing black. Thank you. That's John Mozart. So it's, you know, I got to do what I wanted.
Love it. And you had a question too.
How many main bearings?
Pardon?
How many main bearings?
So how many main bearings are in these motors?
One on each end and then in between.
Okay.
So yeah,
So like 5.
5. Yeah, it's a 5 bearing, but they're big. They're not little guys. They're big.
Are they
And then they're babbited. Yeah, they're babbited, pressure oil on the thing, and oiling is from the inside, so there's no external lines on the thing. And then you go up forward, there's 2 big lines going up into the heads, and then there's oiling onto the cam, and then drains going back down on
Right.
the thing.
And so question up here.
When it was on the dyno, what kind of torque and horsepower, RPM were you getting out of it?
So the question is, what kind of torque or horsepower were you getting when you had the car on the dyno? From this?
We weren't looking, we were looking more for drivability and so forth like that. So I asked Vinay, who did it, who was down at
Denison.
in Denison. And Vinay said, we're probably, you know, I could do it, but you know, it's not going to be real, and you know, we don't need to know that right now. So I think we're getting 120, 140 horse out of it. It's got very good torque on it. We don't know what the torque readings are because we were looking for drivability and we're looking at flow because we had I had basically some severe driving and also fuel flow with the thing because of the way I'd set it up. And the big one is the original intake manifold was designed by myself and Craig Wick, and we basically built it together. And the problem was he had used the technology from a Holley carburetor. And a Weber carburetor and a Holley carburetor really different. So what we needed to do is do individual runners for each throttle, for each butterfly. And now that's the way the car is. And it really runs well because of that. I just didn't know.
We'll probably have time for like 1, maybe 2 more questions. And Pete, I know you had a hand up for a moment.
It just notoriously on pre-war cars, especially cars like the 29 Alfa, they're not symmetrical. They're, you know, often you'll find one wing is a different size to the other wing or whatever, but that's the way that was made. Presuming that's the case with John's car, did you have to make a choice or did you do it non-symmetrical like they are?
So the question being, since most pre-war cars are asymmetrical by accident, then the question is, when he modeled it, did he pick a side? Did he just happenstance, or did you actually make it a little asymmetrical? Or could we lean on one fender up there and see what happens?
Here, it's really interesting because the car is symmetrical, and there's a reason why. We only digitized one side of it.
Yeah.
So when we flipped it in the computer, we got the same side and we got the same side. So when we cut the buck, we got the same side. So it's very symmetrical, and it's much more symmetrical than John's car. And also we were able to do better fitting. So if you look at the way the wings are bolted on the car, they're just bolted straight on. We don't have a bunch of pooge and stuff in there because the stuff actually fits. Because when we did it, we made things really fit. So that has a better fit and finish than John's car.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, because we were able to do it. And we
And
also
behind-
use modern techniques.
And right behind you, Dan, you had a question? Saw your hand back there.
Got any admiration or even acknowledgement from Alfa for finishing the engine development?
So the question is, has Alfa Romeo acknowledged his achievement of finishing the engine, finishing this off, and completing their engineering? They said anything one way or another?
No,
No.
but We have done, thanks to Fred, we have done a couple of different things with the club. And then when we had the nationals here, an article was written on the car and so forth. So the car has gotten recognition in this area here. And I think if I was sitting in England or something like that, it would get much more recognition, or if the car could go to Villa d'Este or something like that. But there's a couple of people that have come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and they're experts on everything, and they've told me how and so forth. They've actually, most of them, been very nice. But a good example is all the engines, I purchased the first engine, but the other engines, people came to me knowing that I had it, and it's very steep getting to the top, and how many people really want these engines? And so people would love to, what are you going to do with the engine? The project is enormous. So you can have the engine and look at it, but if you really want to work on it, and there's no paperwork, there's no nothing. So to do this is a big project. And they finally said, David, are you interested in the engine? Yes, I'm interested in the engine, but I'm interested at this level. You're not going to retire on what I'm going to pay you for this engine. So all the engines were negotiated and so forth. And to get the other engines out of Europe, they had to be paid in cash. And I had a friend go get them in his Volvo and bring them into Germany, create them, and get them to me. So it's not straight away how it all happened.
Nice.
Alfa's no different to any other
Yep.
manufacturer. There's, as you know, I'm BMW guy, but failed projects, they've got no.
Yep.
There's nothing there. If it's a failed project, they just forget about it.
Excellent.
Like, well, it's gone, whatever.
Well, thank you all for coming. I know that there's probably a question or two that we may have to just reserve for after we turn off the show, because you guys are still here in person, but I want to thank everybody who came today. If you're here in person, you get the treat of saying, hey, David, can we go upstairs and look at the car up close in person? And the answer is yes. And the car will be up there for the next 6, 7, 8, 10 months, 12 months. I don't know, keep it as long as I can. But the idea is it'll be upstairs for, for a while, and we'll give it back to him when he finally twists my arm. But I want to thank everybody online for being, joining us. And then also, if you are online and you're a long ways away, just justify the trip. Come on out, enjoy the museum, enjoy the exhibit upstairs. I want to say thank you also to David, especially here for being part of this and providing both the car and all your information. That's great. I even gave you back your books. Woohoo! So nice of me, huh? You thought they were gone. I know.
Anyway,
the car, though, again, is on display for quite some time, so please enjoy it today, and then anybody who can come back. There's also a few other new cars sitting upstairs. The poster of the exhibit features David's car prominently. It's got the Montreal, which we have the owner of the Montreal in this room as well, and it also features the Alfa Monza in there. So, and he wouldn't come to this room because he doesn't like any of us. So. Oh, it's just David. He doesn't lie. He likes me. So anyway, that is up for sale up in the gift store. I also wanted to let everybody know, remind everybody that the next talk is going to be on December 10th, to Saturday. That Alfa talk is going to be on Alfa one of a kind, one-offs, prototypes, show car type things. So thank you everybody again for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.